Well, hey, Beat family, Alan Parr here, and I've got the extreme honor and privilege of meeting with a new friend. Her name is Cindy Clemishire, and she's probably not unfamiliar to you at this point. Her story has gone viral as she has been vocal about speaking out about the abuse that she experienced at the hands of ex-pastor Robert Morris of Gateway Church here in Dallas, Texas. And this story is near and dear to my heart, obviously, because I live here in Dallas. I've got many friends who go to this church, but also because her story is not uncommon. It's not something that's unique in the sense that this is happening at a very, very alarming rate. It's much more prevalent than we would probably give credit. And so she has graciously, boldly agreed to come here on the beat and share her story with us once again. So Cindy, welcome. So glad you're here.
Well, thank you. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, Cindy, I just want to just kind of jump in and just ask you, just share kind of how did you and your family initially come to know Robert Morris? Like, what was that dynamic like? What was the relationship between him and his wife, and maybe the church that you all were attending, and
Right.
your family as well?
Well, it was probably about 1981, and we went to a youth revival the first time we ever saw Robert anywhere in Tulsa, Oklahoma. And after that, shortly thereafter, he came to Hominy, my hometown, and did a youth revival there. And then a few months later, the church that we attended as a family had some issues, and a few people left the church and started another church. And after that, he began coming back and visiting and filling in as because there was no pastor. So that went on for quite a while, and that's how we became very close family friends with Robert and Debbie. And Josh was a baby at the time. I think he might have been 3 months old when we first really started spending a lot of time with Robert and Debbie. And my parents, were very involved in church and loved helping build the church. And they had been blessed to have a nice home that could accommodate people to come in and stay. And so they would just come and preach on the weekends, but then they would just started coming to enjoy family time. Lots of land, and just created a fun family environment. And so they would come and spend time with our family. And that started late 1981 and all through 1982. So that's kind of how it all started with them.
Okay, gotcha, gotcha. So basically, he was filling in, doing pulpit supply, kind of
Right.
interim pastor, so to speak, and essentially, he just kind of started spending time with your family. Was he and his family like just kind of coming and staying every so often, or were they like living with you all for periods of
Oh,
time? Or
no.
okay,
No, they never lived with us. They just would come and stay several days at a time. So
okay,
he would come maybe to preach on a Sunday. They might come in on Friday and stay
gotcha.
until Monday.
Okay,
Or sometimes he would come in by himself on Saturday and leave on Monday, depending on, Debbie was pregnant with James during part of that time. And so they just would come as they could, or they would come in and spend time just to be there and enjoy the pool in the summertime or whatever. And we would sometimes go to Texas too, and we would go to Shady Grove and met other friends in the Texas area. So it was they were very, very close family friends. And um, I mean, I often say he was more like a cousin or an older brother because I had cousins in that same age group.
mm-hmm.
And so it was easy for them to just feel like family because we had a very large family and lots of cousins and things like that. So
Yeah,
that's how I kind of related to him when I think back of
yeah.
how the relationships were in our home.
Okay, great, great. Yeah. Um, so from my understanding, looking at other interviews and just your different news outlets and posts and things, apparently the abuse started Christmas Day in 1982, I believe. You were 12 years
That's right.
old, and I even read somewhere that you remember wearing pink pajamas and things like that, and you
Right.
just you have your very vivid memories of it. So, as much as you feel comfortable, can you kind of explain how this whole mistreatment, this abuse began, and while you're there, maybe help us understand a little bit more about this idea of grooming.
Right.
How does someone who takes advantage of little kids, how do they groom? What does that grooming process look like? Because I want parents to be fully understanding of this, as well as maybe teens who might
Sure.
be watching this to know, like, oh, these are signs. This is what's happening. So talk to me a little bit about those two things: the abuse, the extent of it,
Sure.
and then the grooming piece.
Well, I mean, these are very good topics to talk about. I think the grooming is so important for people to understand. It's really not talked about at all. And so you can imagine back in the 80s, I mean, we're not that far apart in age, but in the 70s and 80s, I don't know if that word was even something anybody ever heard talked about. But looking back and having some of the education I have now, um, it's not just grooming the child, it's grooming the family, at least in our situation with a family friend in the home. So I'm sure that it would be the same if it was a neighbor or a family member or, you know, a friend of an older sibling or something like that. But the grooming really is involves the whole family, and the I mean, I guess we got to come up with a term, but for Robert, what it looked like, and I would think any groomer, it is just making the family feel comfortable with them being alone with the child. They might offer to take them to the grocery store, or like in our situation, go outside and swim with the child so that there's an adult in the pool, or just anything that makes the family get accustomed to that adult spending time alone with the child. That's how they groom the family to be
Gaining
accustomed to
trust,
it.
gaining the trust.
Mhm.
Hmm.
And then as far as just the child, like for me or a child in general, they'll often start with just touching a child on the back, or putting their hand on their knee, or stroking their hair, or telling them how cute they are or pretty they are, or I'm just thinking of little girls. I know it happens to boys too. So um, they start with gradually touching the child in ways that it would be normal. A hug, but I think they maybe get a little longer each time, but they just gradually develop something that seems normal, and they move it into a realm that is not normal. So for my situation specifically, like I said, Robert had been coming to our home with Debbie and Josh, and been staying in our home. And our home was a two-story house. It's still there. Parents still live in the same home. Um, and so my parents' rooms downstairs, my siblings, my room, all the kids' bedrooms were upstairs. So there was a lot of privacy, and it would be easy to spend time alone with a child, or get into a child's room at night, or anything in our home, I guess. I mean, that's another thing to be aware of for parents. You have a large home and you have guests, be aware of where people are in the home. But I, like everybody has heard, I was 12 years old, and I have a 12-year-old grandson. And I think back about that, because I have thought, why in the world, when he said, "Come into my room," which was really my bedroom, he was staying in my bedroom that night. He had flown into Tulsa with his dad. He brought his dad with him that night, and we picked him up at the airport as a family after being at my grandmother's, and drove home all in one car. And he sat in the back seat. I was in the back seat. My sisters, we were all crammed in the back seat. We had two bench seats back in the 70s or 80s. I guess it was in the 80s, but it was a 70s car. And he just got out of the car, got his luggage, and he said, come see me before you go to bed. Come in my room. I want to tell you something. Well, I think about my 12-year-old grandson, and if I had friends staying in my home with me and he was there, or if we were staying in their home, he's known them since he was born. So if someone said, even the ones he's hasn't known that long, if one of my friends that he was should trust said, "Hey, Brennan, before you go to sleep, come in. I need to tell you something," he would go in the room. He would have no question as to why he shouldn't go in the room. So I have been able to, you know, cut myself some slack on that because as I've shared my story, it's really bothered me. Why did I go in in that room? And that's how I've thought about it because I know that my grandson would do the same thing if he wasn't educated in this. And so I did. I went in the room and I just expected it to be him telling me something. And he just started talking and it just kind of drug out. And so, like I said, I can remember vividly what I was wearing. It was my very favorite pair of pajamas. I know we bought them at the little local department store in my hometown. And I remember loving them when my mom bought them. And they had bloomers. I mean, I was 12 years old, probably in the sixth grade at the time when we bought them. And they were the softest, lightest pink pajamas. And they were just very little girlish pajamas, you know? And and I had a little house coat that I wore over it. And so I was not dressed in a way that was provocative at all, as you've seen some of the information that's come out where they've accused me of the one that was pursuing him. So, um, I feel like I'm rambling a little bit,
No, no,
but
no. You take your time. You're good. You're good. This is important.
yeah, it was definitely a very innocent situation on my part and very meditated on his part to ask me to come into the bedroom when we were still outside before everybody had gone to bed. So he had been thinking about this. That part is very challenging as an adult and thinking about my own children and grandchildren. He premeditated that for how long? He flew into Oklahoma. He rode in the car an hour from the airport. We got out of the car. He said, "Come talk to me before you go to bed." That took a while to get everybody in the house and situated and ready for bed. So, um, that's pretty disturbing that he did that much premeditation on how to get me into the room. So, when he asked me to, or told me, I guess, was more of how it went, just to lay down on the bed and talk to him, I just did it. And it was talking and just slowly started to touch me. And like I've said, put his hands up my breast, up my shirt, into whatever breast I had at that age, very little, um, and down my pants. And that was December 25th, 1982. So I was in the seventh grade at that point. I turned 13 the next month, but I was not a very developed 12-year-old at that point. So,
Mm. Well, first of all, that
yeah.
that that took a lot of courage to share those details again.
Yeah.
And guys, if you're listening here, just know that I should have said this at the beginning, but if you have kids listening, you may want to consider having them not listen because this stuff is can be very serious. So wow, so obviously 12 years old, it's your probably your first experience with anything physical and things of that nature.
Yes.
So yeah, so this continued for 4.5 years or so.
Mhm.
And what were you interpreting as happening? Well, first of all, how frequent was this happening to you? And how did you
Yeah.
interpret what was happening between you and Robert? I mean, was there, obviously you're at this point you're curious now because what happens is whenever, someone is young, they get curious about sexual, physical things beyond before they're
Sure.
supposed to. It awakens desires that should not be woken, anytime it's soon. So what
Right.
how did you begin to process that at 12 and 13
Well,
and 14?
and like I said, I turned 13 the next month. I come from very, I was a very, what I would consider sheltered child. We went to church. We um, did things with our family. I had aunts and uncles and cousins, and all my grandparents lived very close. Part of my family lived just minutes away in the same small town. And then some lived in Tulsa, about an hour away, but we were always with family. So I was not really allowed to spend the night at other people's homes. I had a couple of very close friends that I did a few times, and they would come to our home a few times. I'm still thankfully close with those girls. Um, so I was very sheltered and did not know anything sexually. I mean, as you know, we had TVs that you had to get up and walk over to the television to change the channel.
Yes, I remember.
And my our TV in our living room, we didn't have TVs in the bedrooms or anything. We had one TV in the home, and I think lightning struck maybe when I was 13 that year, right or during my 7th grade year. It hit something that caused the TV to go out, and my dad said, "We're not replacing it. We don't need a TV." So I grew up in a home from 12 some in my 12th year through until my senior year without a TV in the home. So to say that I mean, we didn't have a movie theater in my hometown. We had to go to Tulsa for a movie, so we didn't really do that. And if we did, it was definitely nothing more than G or maybe PG,
Mhm.
and that would have been very rare. So I did, of course, could see a TV at my grandparents' house, but it was nothing like we live today.
Mhm.
And as far as piquing interest, I don't even think it did that. I
Mm.
feel like the first year probably because it happened frequently. If he was there, if we were together, if our families were together, or he was in our home, something happened every
Wow.
time. There was never a time that he came to visit and something didn't happen.
Wow. Oh my.
So it's not that it happened when I was 12, it's that it happened every time we saw him and Debbie, whether it was in Oklahoma or in Texas, because like I said, we would go to Texas to visit and do things there. So even if it was he took me to the grocery store and he stopped somewhere to kiss me, or we were in the swimming pool and he would touch me in the swimming pool, even if it was just briefly, there was never a time that can recall that he didn't touch me if he was around our family. So for the people that are out there saying, "Why would you wait so long? Why would you tell this? This was so long ago." This was not a situation where somebody came to our home and visited one time, and it happened one time. And I would say I don't remember a peaking in interest of sexual activity or anything sexual. I just remember I really believe it was compartmentalizing because I loved Debbie. And as I got older, obviously understand that people shouldn't do things unless they're married. I mean, even though we didn't talk about a lot of those things, I knew that. Um, I never dated in high school or junior high. I mean, of course, there were a couple of boys that I liked, maybe, but everyone knew that I was not allowed to date. Um, I didn't really talk to boys on the phone even. So I had friends at school. I was very, very active in school. I was an athlete. I was involved in FHA, Future Homemakers of America back then. I don't know what they call it now. I like I said, I ran track. I played basketball. I was in the band until I started from 5th through 8th grade. I played the piano and took piano lessons for my whole junior
Mm.
high and high school years. And we went to church every Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night. I was very involved in just life. I enjoyed school, so I wanted to make good grades, and so my life was very full of
Mm,
normal childhood activities, and, um, so I think maybe that was a distraction for me, so I
mhm,
didn't get caught up in whatever was happening with him, and I knew that as I got older, it wasn't right, um, but it didn't feel like abuse. It took me a
mm,
long time to wrap my brain around that was abuse, like, and that's child abuse, that's sexual child abuse. Like, when I started counseling, I said, "He wasn't mean. How can you why would we call it abuse, or why would we say he molested me? That sounds so mean. Why would you say he raped me?" Because legally, it was rape by instrumentation. When they insert fingers into a anything in Oklahoma inserted into a child is considered rape.
mhm,
Um, so, there was never actual sexual intercourse, but that's not because he didn't try. He wanted
mm,
to. But by the time
mm,
I was 16, and that's when he started asking and attempting that, I knew that I did not want that. I knew that I did not want to, I mean, I just knew that was not something I was going to allow to happen. I told him, no, we're not, or I would just avoid.
yeah,
So, um, I don't believe I saw him again after I turned 17, but I did tell 2 months after I turned 17. So it did go all the way through my 16th, you know, when I was 16,
yeah,
um, which was a lot more I was a lot more mature, as just you mature as a teenager, right? And you understand things more. So,
yeah,
yeah,
yeah. So, um, man, this is yeah, troubling.
yeah,
So for people out there, this is clearly not my position, but I know there's some warped and extremely insensitive people out there who
right,
would ask the question, well, if you didn't get something out of this or you didn't enjoy this, why didn't you just stop? Why didn't you tell them stop? Why didn't you tell your parents whenever it happened
mhm,
right away? There must have been something in you that, you know what I mean? There's those evil, sick
right,
people out there that are going to try to say those things.
and they
Um,
have,
yeah,
they
and
have,
I'm sure they have. Trust me, I'm on internet, so I know how people can
yeah.
be. So what would you say to somebody who insinuates or suggests in some way um, that you should have spoken up, or maybe you had some played some part in this?
Right. Well, the very first time that he touched me on Christmas night, he said to me, "Now you cannot tell anyone because it will ruin everything." I did not know what he meant by that at 12 years old, but he repeated that to me many times. "You can't tell, don't ever tell, never tell your sister." He knew we were close, and she was older than me. So he made it very clear that I was not supposed to tell. And like I said, I mean, I looked up to him. I looked up to Debbie. I loved them. They were like our family. So I understand these people that are like hurting at Gateway, and they're confused and they feel lost because he's gone. I understand that feeling. It's grieving. My family grieved over that relationship loss, even though there was this horrible thing that he did, this crime that he committed to me, but affected my whole family. There was a grieving because they were like family and they had to be immediately taken away from our family.
Hmm.
So I can say that as a child, when an adult that you look up to and care about tells you not to tell anyone, you're not going to tell anyone. If you're a good kid that wants to please people, and I was a middle child, I'm a middle child, I'm a people pleaser. I like everybody to be happy. It doesn't really matter who it is, or when I was a little girl or now. I want people to be happy. I want to be helpful. I I want to do things for people. So for someone I cared about to tell me not to do something, I knew it would make them unhappy if I did that. And whatever ruining meant, ruining everything, I didn't understand that. Of course, I do now.
Mhm.
But the thought never crossed my mind to tell.
Mm.
As I got older, and like I said, when I was 16 and he started pursuing more, I knew it would have to end. And I do remember thinking, well, someday I'm going to get married. And when I get married, this was like how screwed up you can become in your thinking, because I thought I can't tell anyone. So at some point, I will get married. He could perform the ceremony. So he would be standing there performing the ceremony with whoever I marry. So that would be like his signal. This can't happen anymore. Can't do this anymore. I'm getting married. Now, maybe it's okay for him to do something while he's married. Obviously, he didn't have that boundary. But in my mind, if he performed the ceremony and I got married to someone, that would be the indication this can't happen anymore.
Yeah. See, and I hope you all are understanding and a little bit of the psyche and the psychology behind what Cindy is sharing is that um this wasn't perceived as evil because it felt natural, it felt normal, it felt um uh uh, from someone they trusted, even to the point where you were ending this exchange between the two of you, but you were still thinking at that time, well, maybe he can perform the my wedding one day. I mean, that just
Right.
goes to show you the power of how this type of abuse and mistreatment can change and alter how we think. So let's fast forward a little bit. So you finally got the courage, 16, I want to say 17 or so,
I was
to
17.
17 years old to speak out and talk to a friend, I believe, and then your parents found out. So what were your parents? I mean,
Well, the
man,
friend was actually one of
yeah,
my parents' friends. She
okay,
was an adult, and she was from Texas. She was part of Shady Grove. I'm still, we talk occasionally. We've had a long conversation last week, um, and I love her. Without her, this would not have come forward. And I do believe God uses everything for good, because in the midst of all that, um, there was another family that came to our home that we did not know. I was 16, and they brought their newborn baby and their 3-year-old little girl, and they came with this family that I was talking about from Shady Grove to stay in our home for a few days, from Texas. And I know they were having marital problems, and so remember them asking this lady. I mean, her name's out there. They've said her name. It's on documents and stuff. But Glenda had asked if they could come and stay with us, with their family, and enjoy riding four-wheelers and swimming and all that kind of stuff, and just get away, and maybe it would help their marriage. And sadly, I remember when they got there and walked in, I saw this man and I was very concerned. I knew instantly. I remember just thinking, looking in his eyes, and I wanted to leave. I
mm,
mean, what goes through my mind is I wanted to run away. There was something I sensed in him that was not okay, and I just dismissed it. Everybody kind of was doing their thing and getting the luggage, and everybody was coming in. And so our family friends, this couple had 3 kids, and they were all like my age and my siblings' ages. So we all were always hanging out and doing things together. And they were from Texas, and we met them through Robert. And they brought this other family with these small children. And so lots of us in the home. I was in an area of the home that was kind of an open balcony area with a pull-out sofa bed with this couple's 3-year-old little girl. That's where she slept with me while they were there. And I woke up one night with that man on top of me. And I just remember being very still and I was on my back and holding myself just very still and my legs very straight. And I knew that he was trying to rape me. And I mean, just, I literally, when you say it piques your curiosity sexually, I was 16 and he used the word orgasm and I had never heard that word. He asked me if I had ever had one and I had never heard that word before. I did not know what he was talking about. But I never responded, and I just remember praying in my spirit. I was just praying, "Lord, please just get him off of me, Lord, get him off of me," and over and just repeating that sentence in my mind. And all of a sudden, he rolled off of me and rolled onto the floor. That was, like, between this pull-out sofa bed and the wall, and he was there for a few minutes, and then he got up and he said, "Who was that?" And I said, "I don't know." He thought someone had walked by, but no one had walked by. And I believe still to this day that the Holy Spirit just made him sense something, that was the presence of the Holy Spirit. I don't know why else he would have rolled off of me and thought someone was there, and there was no one there. And I didn't tell anyone. Um, Again, I think just being trained to not say anything. I really don't know. I just know it was scary and I didn't want to cause trouble. And I just didn't say anything, and I stayed away from him, and they left, and apparently he made a comment about how I looked or something, which if you see pictures, I've got pictures. I didn't have long blonde hair. I was an athlete, I had short hair. I was just I was not I did not look like this, which shouldn't matter. It doesn't matter, but,
Mm.
um, he told, Glenda's son, who was 14, something about how I looked and after they got home. And I guess Jeff knew enough that that wasn't normal because he was 30 years old. And he told his mom. And Glenda ended up confronting Brad and he confessed to her what he did. And because of that situation, that I do believe God protected me in, but that situation is what brought this situation with Robert to light because Glenda
Mm.
came and she was there in March and of 1987 and she asked me about this what happened with Brad and I said yes he did that and she was just devastated that it had happened on with her bringing the family there
Mm.
and she asked me if anybody else had ever done anything like that to me before and I just looked at her and I said I can't tell you that like I can't tell you and she told me I had to and we kind of went back and forth about it. So we were literally sitting in my closet that was a little walk-in closet together with the door shut because she knew I was afraid to tell. And she said, "Let's go in here and sit down. Nobody can hear you." And she had me close my eyes and I told her that it was Robert. And it was devastating because even the other day she told me Robert was like a son to us. Like it was devastating to our families. We were all connected through Robert and we had to go down and tell my parents and that's when that's how it all came out. But
Mm.
the thing that happened with Brad, no one ever did anything about it. We never saw those people again. But his wife at the time, he is now divorced from, she reached out to me a couple of weeks ago, maybe it was last week, and 'cause she had seen the story, and she said, "I'm so proud of you for coming forward." And she said, "I know what Brad did to you when we were at your house." And she said, "I will back," she just said, "Tell everybody, I don't care, you can share." So, you know, it's a horrible situation, but I know that God without that happening, I hate it that it happened, but I know he protected me, but without that happening, I don't know if I ever would have told about
Mm.
Robert.
Mm. Um,
Um,
yeah, yeah. Thank you for that. I was not aware of the second individual who you had that encounter with. Um,
right.
your parents They found out. I'm a man. I have a 7-year-old daughter, 6-year-old son, and God help me
Right.
if someone if either of them would have told me that this type of thing would have happened to them. I literally do mean God help me.
Yeah,
So
and my dad felt the same way. He
I
wanted to
yeah
kill Robert, but
yeah
he is also a very strong Christian man, and he knew that wasn't the answer.
yeah.
Um, and so for him, the answer was to call Olin Griffin and tell him to get him out of the ministry. And
Mhm.
he did that, right? I mean, we were sitting in my parents' room, my mom, my dad, Glenda, me, and my dad got up and made the phone call. And he apparently got him out of the ministry. But as we all know from things that we've seen on the internet and his book, he tells that after a month of being a security guard, he went back to work for James Robinson in the prayer center or whatever. So that's not really out of the ministry to me if you're back working at James Robinson's ministry. Um, but that was all he knew to do at that time. In 1987, calling the cops on someone that was like a family, it was just a very confusing
That
situation.
was gonna be my
And I mean,
question. Yeah.
it was more just he was heartbroken at multiple levels. I mean, the church. I mean, obviously me. I mean, that first and foremost, heartbroken that this happened to his daughter in his home. But you add on the layers of the church and Robert's family and um, our family, just all of it. It was a lot. It's still a lot.
Yeah. So it wasn't something that it doesn't sound like it was something that your father or your parents seriously considered to like turn him into the authorities because this is a crime for
Right.
in every sense of the word, and he you know could have and honestly should have, in my opinion, served significant time for this. So I'm assuming it was
I,
just
I
an
would I
yeah.
would I question that because in 1987, if we would have told anyone, I don't know. Like, I don't know how often people went to prison for that back then. I don't know if they
Mm,
served time back then. I don't know,
mm,
without we talk about things today that we didn't talk about back then. This was not talked about. I never had
mm,
heard of this thing. My parents had never heard of anybody doing anything like this. So,
okay.
what
Okay.
would have happened back then? I really don't know. And the
Yeah.
statute of limitations at that time was 2 years, which I think is kind of ironic that he waited a little over 2 years to come back and ask my family for forgiveness and a blessing, which we had
Mm,
already forgiven. I feel like we're constantly forgiving. Things
mhm.
are always coming up. So I have to forgive him. I want to forgive him because I don't want to be bitter and
Sure.
angry.
Sure.
Um, I want him to be well. I
Yes.
hope and pray he hasn't continued to live like that and do things to other girls.
Mm,
Um, but would he have gone, or would it have been a slap on the hand and continued? I mean, I read an article that a music minister at Prestonwood Baptist Church, maybe back in the 80s, I want to say maybe it was 1989. I read that article today that he got caught and he got caught touching boys and nothing happened to him. He went back to Mississippi to live.
mm,
So
mm,
in the 80s, I just don't know that
mm.
people turned people into the cops, to the authorities for
That
that.
makes total sense. That makes total sense. Yeah. Um, so one part of your story that I don't feel like has been talked about much, and maybe I just haven't seen all of your interviews, but is how does an experience like this shape you, affect you? Because now you're 17 and you're getting ready to be an adult, 18, and now you've got your life ahead of you. Obviously, you mentioned earlier you wanted to get married. I know that you did get
Right.
married, but you're probably thinking about dating and, different things like that. A normal life that people have. How yours was anything but normal, but How does an experience like this impact or affect your spiritually, which you can leave that to last if you want, but just emotionally, mentally, um, physically, relationally? How are your relationships? Was there some things you had to process? Did it get in the way of forming good relationships, marriage? Talk to us as much as you want about that.
Well, I'm going to start with it still has an effect on me today. um, the way I like to explain it, because it's very complicated. I have said for years that what someone does to a child physically when they sexually abuse a child, especially when it's done in a, um, as Oprah called it, a seducing way, when they're kind and they're gentle and they seduce the child into this um, abuse, you that part of it, the physical touch part of it, for me seems like maybe it's less important than what happened with the framework that was developed through all those years. It wasn't, like I said, it wasn't a one-time thing and done. It was my entire adolescence was being shaped into adulthood by a pedophile, by an
Mm.
abuser. So the person that was touching me my entire adolescence was teaching me that abuse is love, that this is what it looks like when someone cares about you. This is how they touch you. This is what they do. This is so that framework obviously carried on into my adulthood. And if someone, even the looks that you would get, I can remember my mother when I was 16, we got out of the car. Again, he had been in the car with us, and he had probably looked at me a certain way or said something to me in the car when that she didn't hear. And we got out of the car and she said, "Quit flirting with him." And I think I was 15 at the time. And I will never forget that. And I've talked to her about it. She was like, "Oh my goodness, I don't remember. I'm so sorry I said that. Had I known what was going on, that would, I never would. I can't believe I said that." And I remember thinking, I'm not flirting with him. But he had groomed me to respond to him in ways. I did not understand that. Literally this year, I had an incident that I had this awareness of, um, he groomed me and trained me to respond to him in ways that fed that in him. Whatever he needed, he got something from me by responding to him a certain way. And so, those are the things that are just, at least in my situation, when it's going on for so long with someone so close in the family, also a spiritual leader. I mean, he was teaching deep stuff. I don't know if you know who Milton Green is, but Milton Green was part of, he was very, a big part of Milton Green's teachings, and he brought that to our home church. And so this man was just very big in our lives,
Yeah,
you
dynamic,
know?
very,
Right. Very
yeah.
charismatic.
Yes.
And like I said, I mean, we loved Debbie too, and it was, and the kids. And um, so it was very complicated. It's not just he touched me and he kissed me and he did these things to me, but he literally, my dad laid the foundation, I feel like, for my life, thankfully, for 12 years before Robert, or 11 years before Robert came into our life, of, of the Lord, and going to church, and our really understanding the Bible. And he did that also through my adolescent years. But on top of that, the framework that was created with Robert, that literally framed how I thought about relationships and men and what love looked like, that was the most detrimental part of all of it.
Yeah. Yeah. So, um, did you find it difficult to to have healthy relationships, as you moved into your adult life? Did you, I mean,
Sure.
obviously, yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I went to college. I had a little track scholarship and went to a private Christian school, college. And of course, I've never dated. And there was a boy there that, of course, in college, you get interact and you start dating. Well, of course, my dad was at this point, it was very traumatic. So, not only did he not want me to date, he didn't want me dating even in college because at this point he just wants to protect me. He wants to go probably make up for lost time or something. I mean, I can only imagine how I feel about my own kids. So what he has gone through as a father breaks my heart that he probably was trying to do something to bring back some of those years. But um, so I dated a little bit in college, but then ended up getting married to a man that was about the same age as Robert. So the same age difference.
Mm.
Um, we were married for about 3 years. I have my oldest son from that marriage. So obviously, I'm very grateful. I have, how can you not be when you have kids from a marriage? And he's a good person. It just, I don't even know how to go into the depth of the trauma that it does cause relationships. Um, because you know, I mean, I had an affair with the person that I ended up being married to off and on for 20 years, and that destroyed my marriage. I'm not saying my marriage was great when that happened, but at the same time, I was just extremely vulnerable to anything that looked remotely like what Robert was in my life. I am just, devastated for the pain that that caused. Devastated that I didn't have the help, that I didn't have the understanding. But, you know, I started going to counseling. I was 22 when I got married. So we got divorced at 25, and I did really start going to counseling at that point. That's when I dug in and started, and that was and off and on. And about 28, I met a therapist that I'm still kind of close to, and I went to her for a good 10 years pretty consistently, and then off and on after that. But she's the one that said something about it being abuse, and I said, I don't know why you call it that. It wasn't mean. And so she worked with me for years to understand what that
Mm.
was and um, how that impacted my choice in relationships and
Yeah.
how it's impacted. I mean, honestly, what the biggest thing I think that was created, that was just the biggest challenge probably to overcome from that is the codependency that's created.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I did not correlate that my codependency issues were related to Robert, that's where that stemmed from until really this year when I
Mm.
had a situation happen that brought me full circle to realize that he had groomed me to look at him a certain way that provided him with something.
Mm.
And just how the Holy Spirit can bring something to your mind and you just instantly have this revelation. You can see like a whole picture or something. I don't know how to describe it, but
Yeah.
when God gives you a revelation of something and an understanding, it's like in a flash, you can see it.
Yeah.
And that happened this year. And when that happens, it's like, wow, instantly I can protect myself from that ever happening again because he revealed to me what it looks like and why it happens and
Mm.
what to watch for. And um,
Yeah.
it just complicates relationships all the way around.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I think also typically you can be drawn to other people that have had childhood trauma.
Yes. Yeah. 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 I didn't know, your history before you shared it. But it's not surprising, in that, when any child experiences, any trauma of any kind, but
Hmm.
specifically to that degree, and doesn't get immediate treatment, early on, like maybe had you
Right,
gone to extreme intensive counseling starting in
right,
college, and really process, because like you said, you hadn't really even processed what had happened until well into your adult life, which, by the way, might answer some other questions that people have about, well, why did you wait so long to share this?
right.
Why didn't you, here it is, it's 2024 and this
Which
happened in
which I
1982.
have.
Yeah, and I
I
want to.
have been sharing.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
haven't waited to share. I have been sharing, but I do. I will address the when you are abused and how long it takes for you to understand that. I've talked to enough people now that have been abused that it's very common. It's not that I necessarily didn't remember it,
right,
but to understand it and
right,
for me to be able to say that was abuse, that was wrong. He premeditated that and he did that to me and he did it over and over and over. He didn't
mhm,
care about me. He harmed me intentionally.
yeah,
And to be able to say that about someone that I cared for as a family member and cared for Debbie, um, it's very painful to acknowledge that.
yeah,
I was 35 years old before I was able to do that.
yeah, yeah,
So, and here it's 19 years later, I'm 54. So,
yeah, yeah, yeah. So tell me a little bit about, what has the communication been like between you and Robert and Debbie? Based on some other interviews and different things I've kind of gathered, that there were some emails back and forth, maybe you reaching out to them or him reaching out to you and
right,
trying to maybe ask you what's it going to take to keep you quiet or
yeah.
whatever. And I don't know all the details. I don't remember all the details, but maybe just talk a little bit or as much as you want about what was the communication like for all this time, and what were the attempts to kind of try to soften this, because obviously Robert in his ministry, Gateway Church, started blowing up, and one of
Right.
the largest churches in the country and whatnot. So clearly, there's a desire to not get this story to come
Yeah.
out. And so, what was the communication like? What were you maybe wanting from him? What was he wanting from you over the years?
Well, I don't know that they wanted anything from me or from us as a family other than us to just accept them back, maybe. I don't really know. Or to like people, he said that he got my dad's blessing. They came to our home in 1989 and said that he had gone through whatever the freedom ministry thing was that he said he went through. And that they wanted to get back in the ministry. And I just remember my dad just saying, I have I've turned you over to God. I mean, that's basically how I left it. And my dad not wanting to do anything to tarnish the name of God, I'm sure. I don't
Mhm.
know. It's just 89 was a whole different time than it's a different era. We'd handle People didn't handle things back then the way we handle them. So I have zero judgment against my dad for the way he handled it. Like I said, there was this article where the Prestonwood Baptist church in Dallas. That back in 1989, it happened there, and nobody did anything. That he just moved on away, and they may have even turned him in. I can't remember the story, but it's just a comparison to say this was normal behavior to not turn people in to the authorities. This is just how people handled it. But so when they came and they were there for maybe an hour or so and they left, and after that 1989 encounter, I can remember going and visiting with Robert and Debbie. I drove to Dallas one time and did visit with them and tried to make sense of it. This was before I got into real deep, intense counseling. I'd had a little bit, but I still had not wrapped my brain around the word abuse. And I just was trying to understand that. And also, trying to understand, like I said, they were part of our family for all these years. My, 5 years of my life, really, if you count from when we met them till they walked out of our life. So that was a difficult thing to let go of all these people that had been in our family, family friends. So I was grieving over the loss of a lot of friendships. Um, so that was just an experience where I went to their home and they let me come in. We talked. It was odd, and he was like, you know, the same way as now. Just I feel like he said something along the lines of, you know, I care about you. We want you to be happy. He's like, I'm still. He made a comment that he would still do something to that at that point, but he wouldn't want to mess up what he had going on with starting a church. So it must have been around the same time that Gateway started. But then Gateway started. I was having children. I was going to counseling. I saw Oprah in 2005, where she interviewed um, a man that had sexually abused someone in his home, or a stepchild. I can't remember the relationship, but it was definitely someone that knew him and he had groomed. And he was describing in detail the grooming that he did to the family and to the daughter, to the girl. And she was about 13, if I remember correctly, when it started. I sat on the edge of my bed listening in shock because I felt like he was describing exactly what Robert did to my family and to me. I was in shock. I literally was like, he's describing everything that happened in my home. And I just couldn't believe it. And I that was when I finally accepted the fact that he abused me. He premeditated it. He used my family. It it was a crime, and that was 2005. And I was angry. I had a baby in 2000, November of 2004. So I still had a baby that was, in a newborn state, pretty much still not even crawling or anything when this came out. And I just remember being so angry that he did this to my family and to me. And I reached out to him with an email. And I made up an email address because I thought it'll probably get there. And I just sent it to robert@gateway.com. And it got there. And Tom Lane responded to the email. And it clearly stated in the email to Robert that I was recognizing what he had done to me on Christmas and, sexually molesting me. I mean, it was very clear that I was a child and I was realizing that this is what he had done to me. And Tom Lane read that email and responded to it. So that's a whole nother topic that we can get to if you want to, but people knew. I mean,
Well, I
Olin
was going to
Griffey
ask about
knew.
that. Yeah, that was going to be.
Yeah.
I'm going there. I'm exposing all this too because
Yeah.
I was going to ask about that because, well, I'll ask about that in just a moment. About the elders and people claiming that they did not know.
Sure. Because I need to the timeline is confusing because of how other media has covered it, and it's spotty and people are confused by it. So 2005, I sent that email and Tom Lane responded and wanted to call me and wanted to act, oh, we care about you and all these things. And I was adamant that I wanted to talk to Robert. Tom, you did not do anything to me. I don't know you. I've got I've got stuff to deal with Robert. I'm upset with him. I want answers. That was kind of like my thought process. And these emails went back and forth from, I think, April to September of 2005.
Mm-hmm.
So it wasn't like I was just aggressive about it. I sent an email. He Tom responded. It kind of went back and forth till finally Robert and Debbie called me. And there's a transcript out there where he's pushing and like trying to get me to tell him what it's going to take for me to be quiet and not tell the story, which is not what I was doing. I was angry and wanted, you know, I wanted something to be done, knowing that there were no statute of limitations. That I mean, I was not protected by anything. He
Mm.
was scot free, and he's just living the blessed life, And I knew that he had lied in his book, the first book he wrote, how he lied that God was wanting to deal with his pride.
Mm.
And I was like, this is just wrong. You're out there
Mm-hmm.
building a life on complete lies.
Deceit. Yeah.
Complete lies. Yeah.
Mm.
And that bothered me. And I mean, my life has not, like I said, I feel it could have been a lot worse. I mean, I never got involved in drugs. But I've been blessed to have a decent career, and my husband of 20 years that we are no longer married, he did well, and we lived a comfortable life um, while we were married. And I have three beautiful children and three bonus kids from that marriage, and I have grandkids, and so I feel very blessed in that way.
Right.
But the journey to get to where I am today
Right.
has been very difficult,
Yes.
and
Yes.
lots of heartache, and um you know to watch someone use the story and create lies from it to build their life around and become successful based on all these lies that are about me too. I had a problem with that.
Yeah.
And so I'm out here spending 150 or $200, it was probably $200 at the time, every time I go to counseling for 50 minutes every
Mm.
week.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I'm
Mm.
spending lots of money trying to wrap my brain around all of that
Mm.
and deal with the framework that he developed through my teenage years. And uh, I wanted something for that. He
Yes.
owed me. I felt like he owed me. And even in the Bible, it talks about restitution.
Yes.
So, people can judge me for saying I was looking for some type of financial um, restitution. I was. I've
Mm.
spent tens of thousands of dollars in counseling and thousands and thousands and tens of thousands trying to rebuild my life.
There's no price you can put on it. I'm sorry.
No,
This is your
you
life. You
can't.
only get one life.
Right.
You don't get to come back and try this again. You get one
That's
life,
right. There's
and there's no
what do
price.
they call it? A mulligan?
Yeah, you don't
There's
get.
no mulligan. There's no
Trust me.
do-over.
Yeah, I play golf. I wish. Yeah, you get them in golf, but you don't get them in life. Yeah.
Right. And I've said that, like, I can't have my teenage years back. I
Mm-mm.
can't start over at 12 and develop a healthy mindset for relationships. I can't go back and change the damage that I've done or I've been in relationships with that uh, have damaged even my children or
Yes.
whatnot. So
Yes.
I'm not. I don't want to play a victim as like, yes, I'm an adult and it's my responsibility to get myself healthy. I've been doing that. It's very expensive. It can be very costly.
Yeah.
So I don't think it's wrong to ask for restitution.
Yeah.
And so at the time, I didn't have a number in mind. I just knew he owed me something. And so on the phone call, he just kept pushing, what do you want? You know, money's not going to make you happy. I said, I didn't say it was. I didn't say it's going to fix everything. You can read the transcript. And it just went back and forth. And
Mm.
finally, he said, how much do you want? And I said, $2 million.
Mm.
I just pulled that number out of the air because he just kept pushing me. And $2 million isn't even enough.
No, it's
really,
not.
when you think about a child's complete life, my family's life.
Yeah,
I mean, it's not just me, it's my entire family.
of course.
It's Glenda's entire family. It's every I mean, there were multiple families
Yes.
that were hurt. Um, so that number was just pulled out of the air, and as soon as I said it, he said, "Okay, bye."
Mm,
That was it.
mhm,
No more he did send one follow-up email where he said that his attorney said that he would not be able to pay me anything, and Robert and Debbie we care about you, and we can't give you any money because you are the one that could end up being in trouble if we give you money.
mm, mm. Okay.
So that was it. And he said, if you ever need to contact me again, you need to contact my attorney. So in 2007, that's when my then, I call him my attorney back then because it's who I called, but he was a family friend from Hominy, who is now the attorney general of Oklahoma. But I just called him and said, I need some help with this. Can you give me some advice on how to deal with this? And he looked into it, and the statute of limitations were up all the way around. And he said, we'll pursue something. And we came up with the figure of $50,000 because at the time I kind of looked through the bookkeeping that I used back then and calculated that I'd spent around $25,000 in counseling up to that point, which was about 20 years from the day I told. So that's not very much money to
Mm,
spend
mm,
in a 20-year period on counseling.
mhm,
Um, but I felt like I needed another 20 years. So that's why I asked for $50,000.
mhm.
And they came back with accusing me of being the person that pursued him and
Mm,
brought up the incident where the man had tried to rape me because Robert knew about that, and brought up another incident that Robert instigated where he was trying to push me off onto someone that was with him that was single, and I was 13, and thankfully that person um, knew that it wasn't right, and I don't remember him ever coming to our home again after that with Robert. I think they parted ways, so I'm assuming that he was upset with Robert about that, but that's all assumption.
mm.
Um, but they accused me of being the person that was pursuing him, and they said that they would offer me $25,000, and they wanted to make sure I was going to counseling and where I was going. They wanted to basically approve where I was going to counseling, and then they wanted me to sign an NDA. And I just, as soon as he said the
Oh,
NDA, I said, I will not ever sign. I
really?
didn't even know what that was. I didn't
Yeah.
know what an NDA was. But Gittner, my attorney, said, well, it means that if you sign it, you can never talk about this. And
Mhm.
I immediately said, I will never sign anything that says I can't talk about my own life experiences.
Exactly.
So that just ended all of it. Never, there was no more communication about it.
Okay. All
And that
right.
was in 2007.
Okay. So
And
2007. Okay, good.
after, yeah, after that, there were multiple times that my family, whether it was my parents or my sister or myself, told different leaders in different churches what had happened because he was invited to speak in these churches.
Okay, right.
And we privately told them because
Wow.
we felt strongly that he should not be in the
Exactly.
pulpit, especially in a pulpit where I'm going to go,
Right.
where I am going to be in church.
Right.
And I really don't know um, why they didn't listen. I don't know if they called Robert and got his side of the story and believed him. There was one pastor in Oklahoma City that he mentioned his name from the pulpit, and it just was horrible when he mentioned his name from the pulpit. And this would have probably been maybe in 2008, 7, somewhere in that 5 to 8, 2008 range. And um, I immediately went to him, and it was a pretty large church, and he knew who we were. And I said, "You can never say his name from the pulpit again." Like, I was traumatized by hearing his name. And I said, this is what he did to me. And I can't come back to church here if you are going to preach on his books. He lied in his book. Like, I kind of went through the whole thing, and he was just mortified by it. And he said, I will never speak of him again from the pulpit. And I'm so sorry. And he put me in contact with someone at the church for counseling, but I had a counselor. I didn't really need to use the church counselor, and he didn't feel qualified. And so that didn't happen. But he did at least say he wouldn't speak about him.
Mm-hmm.
Um, he ended up letting him come to the church and meet with him privately, because Robert had heard through the grapevine that he knew, and Robert wanted to probably save face with this man.
Yeah.
I would assume.
Yeah.
Um, my sister was a member of New Life Church when Ted Haggard fell.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you know that story or if you're
Mm.
familiar with it,
Mm. Mm-hmm.
but it's in Colorado Springs. It was in 2006, I believe, is when it came out. You can do your research on that. It's a pretty sad story. And he was actually a friend of our family and had come to preach and minister at our hometown church also. Um, when he was let go from the church in 2006, they did a pastor search committee. And in 2007, they called Brady Boyd from Gateway, one of the executive pastors from Gateway, to be the pastor there.
Mm.
And my sister was a very active member in that church, and they called for anyone to come and speak to the board if they had any questions or wanted to present anything, that if there was a reason that he shouldn't. And she went and presented the entire story, what Robert did, the whole experience. She took pictures so that people could see what I looked like when I was 12, and told them the in-depth story, and presented it to the entire board or the committee that was calling Brady. And she just didn't feel like it was appropriate to bring him when he was connected to Robert, and Robert was going to
Mm.
be kind of overseeing the church. Just
Right.
didn't make sense. Why would you do that when we've
Right.
already gone through this trauma of Ted having a major moral failure?
Right.
Why would we bring more trauma into our church?
Right.
And so he ended up being called, and he was there. Karen had to leave the church because Robert started going and preaching and teaching, and they were doing ministry and things like that. I don't think that Robert has been involved the last few years
Mm.
at that church, but
Mm.
I know it was very traumatic for my sister to have to deal with that. And just
Yeah.
the fact that she presented that to an entire church board and nothing was done
Yeah.
with the information.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
I don't understand that. And
Yeah.
people often say, why wasn't Robert vetted? Why didn't they interview him more before he became the pastor? Well, he started Gateway. There was no vetting, there was no interviewing. He founded Gateway. Gateway is his church.
Yeah. But,
I mean, I get it, it's God's church, but he
yeah.
started the church. So there's no one to say you can't start a church except the people that knew, and they backed it. They funded it.
Yeah. And so this really, really angers me, because what it says at the core is that you have a lot of churches, not all churches, but a lot of churches
Right.
that are not bold enough to do the right thing. They would
Yeah.
rather save face. They would rather have a celebrity pastor come and draw a crowd and have these conferences and all this, instead of doing the right thing
Right.
and exposing. But I want to touch on something that also angers me a bit, and that's, I've been thinking about this and trying to wrap my brain around this idea that the elders, to my knowledge, at Gateway said that none of them knew, right? And this to
Right.
me is shocking, because okay, yeah, he planted the church, he started the church. Okay, I'll give you that. But
Yeah.
if they at some point got knowledge that he had an inappropriate relationship at some point early in his marriage, to anyone, regardless. And then let's just say
Right.
it's to a young lady or whatever. But let's just say, because I know that Pastor or Robert Morris has been open
Right.
talking about his inappropriate relationship early on his marriage. So I know the elders were. My question is, how in the world can you call yourself an elder and not dig into that deeper and
Yeah.
ask follow-up questions? Oh, when
Right.
was this? Who was this? How old was this person? Because that would be
Right.
like my wife and I dating, and she tells me, "Oh, I had a inappropriate relationship with a guy 2 years ago," and I'm like, "Oh, okay, all right. Well, hey, let's go grab a burger." Like, who does that? Nobody
Right.
does that. No, I would be
No.
like,
No.
give me the details. Okay, was he
Right.
married? You know what I'm saying? Like, and it's shocking to
Where
me
did you
that
meet? How did this happen?
yes. So I'm
And he was a
shocked.
Christian and he was preaching.
Yeah.
Dear, when like they knew this, they knew that it was after he part of his testimony where he says he became a Christian in Jake's motel room 12, which ironically he came up with that number. I was 12 years old,
Mm,
but he says he got saved at 19 in Jake's motel room. There's a sermon called Jake's Motel Room 12, I think, that he did. But so it's after he became a Christian. He was married. He had a child. He continued to have children while he continued to do this. Um, but the fact that it was after he became a Christian and they didn't pursue that more because it's been brought to most people's attention biblically, he never should have been put back
no,
in the pulpit, no matter
no,
what my age was, a
no.
crime or not. It would never should have happened.
Right.
So then you add on the fact that, you know, even Gateway still today is calling it an inappropriate relationship. I don't know if you've seen that. The Larry Swicegood or whatever his name is that put out the statement for the church said
I saw that statement.
this inappropriate relationship happened before Gateway started.
Yeah, with a young
Questions
lady.
you need to ask Robert and Cindy. And I'm like, it wasn't an inappropriate relationship, it was a crime.
Exactly. Exactly.
And you don't have to ask me, I'm telling,
Right, and it wasn't a young
you
lady. I
know?
mean, young lady
No.
implies, of age, and
Right.
that's the part that is so hard to stomach for so many people is that, here it is, and, this person, Robert, is still trying to save face, still not owning up
Right.
by issuing a statement that basically took everything that you just took the last hour of telling me, all the trauma, all the abuse, all the emotional heartache, and then
Right.
summed it up as an inappropriate relationship with a young lady. I know
Right.
on your side that had to be devastating to hear and say, wow, you just summed up my whole life's trauma,
Right.
with it's an inappropriate relationship with a young lady. No, I was 12 years old. It wasn't inappropriate. It wasn't a relationship because he was married.
Right.
It was
Right.
so much not that. And that's the part that angers me is that churches, I mean, be careful. Some churches, because obviously I love
Right.
the church, some
Sure,
churches
me
would
too.
go to that length to cover themselves to not bring negative
Right.
repute or towards their church, and then to say,
Right.
well, none of us knew about it. I just find it very hard to believe that either they didn't know about it, which makes them horrible elders, and I'm just going to be honest with that, because
Yeah.
any elder worth their salt would investigate further and get more,
Sure.
or they knew about it, but they know that if they said they knew about it, that would be even worse. So I don't know what happened
Well,
there,
I
but
will tell you, I had a conversation, like I said, with the lady that I told. I said, people are like, oh, she told a friend. People assume I told someone that was a peer my age, but she was like my mother's friend. It just is a lot of information to get out there, so it gets misconstrued. But when I told my mother's friend, who was also felt like a friend to me, but older, um, she did go and tell Owen Griffin, and she made sure she told him how old I was when it started.
hmm,
And he said, I don't believe you, or I don't believe it. And she said, you think I'm lying? And he said, no, I think the girl is lying.
see, yeah,
So
yeah,
even if I was 16, that eh, even if I was 20, he should have known and not had him back in ministry. But
Yeah.
people knew, people believed Robert. Robert told them what he wanted them to hear. Robert is a smooth talker, and Robert is charismatic, and people want to believe him.
Yeah.
And at least that's how it was when I was growing up, and that's how it seems to be now.
Mhm.
Um, people have said the damage that I'm doing to the church and hindering other people from coming to God. There was a time I felt that way. There was a time that I was afraid to say anything because I didn't want to tarnish the name of God. I know for me it's been very difficult to be involved in church. I go to church. I don't get involved in church.
Right, of course,
It's
yeah.
I keep everything at arm's length, and I try to take what I can when I listen to pastors or preachers or anybody speak. But because of all that I've been through, I definitely have a hard time trusting
Yes.
pastors,
Yes,
or
naturally.
the leadership in general.
Yes.
But
Yes.
I came to the understanding, and I can't remember really where what I read or heard, but it was like maybe it was just something I had a conversation with God about, and I felt like how arrogant of me to think that I need to protect the church or protect God.
Right,
Like,
right,
I don't need to protect God.
right,
He's big enough to protect all of it.
right.
His word tells us that he works everything out for the good for those of us that are called according to his purpose. What power do I have without him? So it's not my responsibility to protect the church. It's my responsibility to be honest,
And that same
to
word,
expose darkness.
yeah, and I was just about to say that same word says, Bible says, be sure of this, that your sin will find you out.
Right,
What's done in the dark will eventually be exposed. And, while none of us are perfect and all of that, and, I don't think a pastor needs to be perfect in order to be in ministry. But certainly,
right,
this definitely qualifies as not being above reproach. And
right,
therefore, this justice needs to be served. And quite frankly, if I'm just being honest, Pastor Morris should be very thankful that he's not in prison. I mean,
right,
losing the opportunity to preach every week and be a pastor to me is getting off extremely light. And like you said,
right,
whether this was a one-time thing, if it was a one-time thing and repenting, even that right there should have been enough to be like, okay, wow. But the fact that this was ongoing for so long, so many
right.
times, that means you're not fit. So
And it was very
yeah,
premeditated,
yeah,
just when you really listen to the story and hear the detail of the premeditating that he had to do to get it started,
yeah,
um, is
yeah,
very disturbing. And like you, if this had happened before he became a Christian
yeah, yeah,
and he
yeah.
repented and he was honest about it
Hmm.
and he built his ministry on truth
Yes,
about,
yeah,
and how many people could he have helped telling the truth?
yeah, yeah. Absolutely,
And
absolutely.
then instead, he used the story and twisted it for his benefit. And I mean, that's what a lot of people have said. The church really grew when he started being transparent about his shortcomings,
Hmm.
his inappropriate relationship.
Mm,
And I mean,
yeah, yeah. That's
it's a
yeah,
shame. I
yeah,
believe that God's grace is bigger than all of it. I believe he can repent. I think, people have said he repented. I'm like, well, if you look at the fruit of repentance, I don't see that. I
right,
don't see
right.
any fruit of repentance. He blamed me.
Hmm.
He lied from the pulpit. He lied in his book.
Hmm.
Um, I don't think that proves repentance.
Yeah,
I pray that he repents. That would
yeah,
be good. And I want to touch on one other thing that we didn't bring up because I
yeah.
know we're probably been going a long time, but
You're good.
um, the word restoration
Mm,
has been thrown out there a lot. How
yes.
Pastor Robert was restored. No one has ever come and asked me if I was restored.
Hmm.
What was done for my restoration? What was done for my family's restoration?
Mm,
What was done for Glenda's family's restoration?
mm, mhm.
I mean, for my dad's restoration. Like, there's been no restoration. I mean, we have worked on that ourselves, but not once. I mean, I've heard a few pastors say, we feel for the victim.
Mm,
We hope and pray the victim has, finds healing and those sorts
mhm,
of things. And like I said,
mhm.
God is so good.
Right.
Even with the hardships of my journey, he's faithful. And I
Yeah,
mean, one of the things that my sister and I've talked a lot about is he does exchange our ashes for crowns of beauty.
yeah,
You know,
yeah. Um,
doesn't mean my life is beautiful and perfect now, but I'm
yeah,
spiritually and mentally, I mean, I'm in a place that I have never been before, thankfully. But
yeah. And that is a beautiful, beautiful thing. Cindy, I want to thank you for being so. I have one final question for you that I want to ask, but I want to thank you for being so open, so transparent, and so vulnerable in this
mhm.
conversation. I know that it's going to bless so many people. And speaking of that, I want to end this conversation on a very redemptive moment. So, what would you say to the young man or young woman out there who's listening to this and they it's so resonating with, they might even be watching this in tears because they
Right.
resonate with your story and they have that their own encounters with this type of mistreatment, this type of abuse, and maybe they feel guilty, they feel like it was their
Mhm.
fault, they have shame, they even feel like maybe they're
Yeah.
damaged goods, that nobody's going to want them after what they've experienced. What would you say to encourage them, uh to really encourage them to know that they are worth, that God sees them differently than maybe how they see themselves? How would you, what would you say to that person who's had this experience?
Well, first, I understand. I have felt all of those things. As recently as the last 10 or 12 months, I have felt unworthy. Um, I mean, that's why Jesus died for us. When I think about him dying on the cross, it wasn't just for our sin. He felt the shame and he felt the guilt and the condemnation and the not good enough. He felt all of that for me.
Mm,
And he felt it for all the other people that have been abused. For the 90-year-old lady that sent me the message that said she's been dealing with that since she was 14.
mm,
She's 90. She sent me a message, gone to 20 different counselors, and told me, thank you for being her voice.
mm,
This isn't about me. This isn't about Robert. It's about all the people that have messaged me and haven't messaged me because the shame is lifting.
mm,
And I want them to have that experience.
mm,
They
mm,
don't need to carry that with them anymore. Like, that's why Jesus died, so that we don't have to live in condemnation. There's therefore no more condemnation for those who are in Christ Jesus. We don't have to live that way.
mm.
It wasn't their fault. There's no shame.
Yeah, yeah. I want to end our time and just a word of prayer for anyone who might be watching this,
Yes.
wherever you're at, whenever you're watching this. Just touch and agree and join us in
Yeah.
prayer because I want to pray over you. There is healing. There is. You can be restored, as we've said today, and
Yeah.
God is greater than all of that. Lord, I just come before you, and I thank you for Cindy. I thank you for her courage. I thank you for her boldness, her voice, just her willingness to. It takes a lot, Lord, a lot to speak out and share something that would expose someone that has oversight over hundreds of thousands of people. Lord, it takes a lot to put yourself out there in the public eye for someone herself who probably hadn't been in the public eye as much over the years, and now many people are aware of her story. So I just thank you for her. Thank you for what you're doing in her life right now. But Lord, I also pray for all those who are watching this. As she said, this is bigger than her. Lord, people who have experienced this, who are still dealing with it, I pray they get the help they need. I pray they get the counseling, the healing, the restoration, the love. And I pray most importantly that they would not internalize what happened to them as being who they are. Lord, that yes, they've had this experience, but that's not who they are, Lord. And I pray, Lord, that your spirit would help them experience healing in a way that only you can do. We love you and thank you, Lord. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
Amen. Well, everybody, thank you so much for your time. I know this was a long video, but it was necessary. And if if this story has touched you in any way, do me a favor, encourage my new friend and sister in the Lord, Cindy. Leave a comment below and just let her know that
Yeah.
that you're praying for her, that you love her, and that her story resonated with you. So God bless everybody, and we'll see you another time. Bye for now.
All right. Bye.